I watched some video today, live video. Anybody know what's going on in Charlottesville, Virginia?
Oh, yeah.
Everybody watching it? So, Charlottesville was, I haven't been there since the 90s, a beautiful town. Thomas Jefferson town. Like, University of Virginia's there. He designed a lot of the buildings there. Very nice looking. The Defense Intelligence Agency is moving there. It's in the Shenandoah Valley, so it's away from the tidal wave, which is kind of interesting. And I guess, which strikes me as a bad move on some people's part and a typical move on other people's part, there was this big white supremacist, maybe KKK, but I'm not sure, definitely neo-Nazis, and alt-right. I thought I was alt-right, but by the way it's being defined now, I am definitely not alt-right. I think I'm very right-wing, though, but I guess I'm not alt-right. Anyway, basically a bunch of white racist people intermixed with a bunch of people who are just tired of the nonsense, and they started out last night with a prearranged, approved torchlight walk, like through the University of Virginia campus, and it looked, I saw the pictures, it looked like over 100 people with torches, like, you know, tiki torches. If you look at any of the pictures of when Hitler was rising to power, and they would have these big torchlight parades, it looked like that. I mean, there were a lot of people walking through the campus with torches, and I thought, oh, that's just not doing anybody any good. And, you know, of course, all the media is saying it's all Trump's fault, and Trump's like a new dictator and a new Hitler kind of thing, and I'm like, ooh. And then today, they had and then I read ahead of time, we're going somewhere with this. Matter of fact, you can start flipping while I talk to Matthew 24. I read that the governor realized this was going to be a problem because these white supremacist groups from all over the country were coordinating to come to this thing. And so then the Antifa and the counter demonstrators were coming together. So they were going to have a bunch of angry people, and they did, in Charlottesville today. And they were supposed to have a noon thing today where they got together and gave their speeches about free speech or whatever. And the governor put the National Guard on standby alert, called in extra deputies and state police, and I know what he did, and on the one hand it was smart, and on the other hand it does kind of irritate me from just the politicalness of it. But you've got these white racists, and they were mostly white, mostly racist. Well, the torches were last night. Today they didn't have torches because it was daytime. But they're wearing like Nazi regalia, and they've got like shields with KKK. There was KKK there. KKK symbology on them. Like, shields are great in a riot, by the way. That's why riot police use them. And then, of course, you got all the protesters. Charlottesville's a university town, plus more people came in. And so what they did is they let it get out of hand. I think the governor gave this to the police, because I was watching fights take place and the cops are just standing there watching people get the tar beat out of them on both sides. They let it get out of hand, and then he declared a state of emergency and said, we're canceling the permit. Everyone disperse. Right? I think they did that on purpose, which that kind of irritates me. But we live out here where we don't really have, I don't think there's a lot of racial tension out here. We just don't feel it. But man, it's evidently going on out there in other big parts of this country, because I was watching camera crews today go through both crowds. So they're going through the racist crowds, and they're saying all the things you think racists say. And then they're going through the other crowd, and they're saying all the things you think they say. There's no coming together of these people. And I think it's getting harder, and battle lines are being drawn harder. Oh, here's the other thing. A lot of the alt-right people showed up in multicam with body armor and long arms with magazines in them. And they're walking around, and I'm just thinking, that's dumb. even if because I was thinking, all right, what if they're because I'm thinking, well, I wouldn't join that protest, but what if it was something bad happened and people were really ticked off, so I'm joining that protest, and I know there's going to be counter-protesters. I think taking a gun to a protest is probably a stupid idea. Because your emotions are going to get up, and the next thing you know, pop, 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 and it's on film. Everything's filmed, right? I mean, it's just terrible. And that's also playing into the hands of people who want to take guns away and stuff. So it was interesting. Matthew 24. We kind of talked about this last week when I asked you, why are you here? Why are you here in the Ozarks? Why are you here at Shofar Mountain? Why are you here in this assembly? Why are you here today? We're going to look at that question from a slightly different angle again today. But we looked at Matthew 24, or at least I talked about it last week. Yeshua's disciples have asked him, what is the sign of your coming? And Yeshua starts talking to him. Look at verse 7 of 24. It says in my Bible, King James, nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in diverse places. Does everybody else say something pretty similar to that? Does anybody have something in the first part, nation shall rise against nation, something else than that? Because the word is ethnos against ethnos. That's race war. It can also be termed as civil war. Civil war, race war. It can be either one. It can be both. It also says kingdom against kingdom. That's kind of what we think about today when we think about one country fighting another country. And it says these things are going to happen, and there shall be famines and pestilences. You know, when there's lots of war, whether it's civil war or big war, there's always famine and pestilence because that's what follows on disease. If you read about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, first is the white one, he goes forth conquering and to conquer. Then comes the red horse, right? And the red horse is war. And then comes, is it the black horse? Famine, right? Famine comes. That's because when people, no, that's the last one. Death rides a pale horse. It's really a green horse. That's because when there's war, guys aren't farming, crops are destroyed, land is destroyed, and so then famine follows that. And then comes death because disease and everything else follows that. So, verse 8. These are the beginnings of the sorrows. Who has a different word than sorrows?
Birth pains.
Birth pangs. That's exactly right. And that is the correct word. And then, you know, we can read elsewhere, like in Mark 13, he tells people, hey, don't worry when you see these things, these wars and rumors of wars, these earthquakes in diverse places, these famines, the end is not yet. Don't worry. The end is not yet. I'm thinking to myself at that point, I'm kind of like, come on, let's have the end come. You know, I'm ready for Yeshua to come at this point. But if you read that, these things are going to happen first before Yeshua comes back. These are the beginning of the birth pangs. It strikes me as interesting that next month, 23rd of September, is when that whole sign in the sky thing happens, and that's Jupiter gets born. Did anybody look at that or not know what I'm talking about by this point? Because I talked about that last week. Does anybody not know what I'm talking about? The sign with Jupiter. And it said, well, here, turn to Revelation 12. And there appeared a great wonder in the heavens, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And so people are interpreting that to be the woman is a Virgo, the virgin, and it says a crown of 12 stars on her head. Well, the constellation Leo, and we can read in Genesis where Yah says, I'm giving you these stars and things and for signs and seasons and all that, right? We looked at that last week. Leo has 8 stars in it. I think I'm right. It's either 8 or 9 stars in the constellation of Leo above the Virgin. Well, this says there's 12. That's because there's 3 or 4 planets that are coming into that part of space, because Leo's always above Virgo. They don't separate and move around like that. They're always together. So if there's 8 above Virgo, I think it's 8, how do we get to 12? Because there's going to be 4 planets lined up right inside Leo. So that makes 12. So it's a crown. And it says that she will be clothed in the sun with the moon under her feet. At the time this happens in Jerusalem, when Jupiter, because then it says, got to get to that point. Upon her head a crown, 12 stars, and she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth. This is the beginning of birth pangs. This is the imagery here. She's travailing in birth. She's laboring. She's in labor. And that's when Jupiter, which has always been misnamed because of the Greeks, but the ancients thought of it as the king star. They didn't know the difference at the time. And so the king is coming out of the Virgin, because it's been resting in where her belly is, if you will, and it's coming out on the 23rd of September, right? And it says she's clothed in the sun, because when this all takes place in Jerusalem, the sun is going to be up. It's going to be like at a certain time in the morning or the middle of the day or something. And so the sun is going to be up. She's going to be clothed in the sun. Well, if she's clothed in the sun, how can you see it? It's really cool about science. They can predict, I think forever, when eclipses are going to be. There's no eclipse planned for Jerusalem on 23rd of September. But something to think about. Look at this next verse. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. There are people who think that something is going to happen in the sky on the 23rd, at least over Jerusalem, that is going to black out the sun for a period of time, and people are going to then be able to see the stars, and of course then you would be able to see this happening too. Interesting that the terminology of birth pangs and birth pangs is used, and then when you look at the world, hey, I'm not the only one. I made a video, or I did a written thing. I sent it to y'all, and then I did a longer version of it, and I put it on my Patreon account. And I said, hey, I think we're going to war with North Korea in 2 weeks. And I picked 2 weeks because 2 weeks from when I said that, it's dark of the moon. It's a good time for us to fly stealth fighters. And then I thought, well, I'm kind of going out on a limb here, and I'm telling people I think we may be going to war with North Korea. That's a pretty bold statement. The next day, all the Asian stock markets fell because they think we're going to war with North Korea. And then 12 hours later, all of the other stock markets started coming down. And then you get the world leaders all talking now about, hey, we're very concerned that this thing in Korea has gotten to the point whether we think this is serious, and they're advising different things because they have different perspectives. But I'm not the only one who thinks that war with North Korea is imminent. Kingdom against kingdom. Big deal. North Korea, it's a little country over there. Well, it's a big deal if you live in South Korea. It's a big deal if China or Russia gets involved. And China, communist country, very controlled press, they have a state press which does not speak for the Chinese government, right? Just like I talked about recently, and I may have said it in the sermon last week, this LDS, Latter-day Saints Mormons organization called AVOW, Another Voice of Reason, or of warning. Another Voice of Warning, I think is what it's called. It's like the preparedness group of LDS, and so they put out, here's how you store wheat, here's how you store this, have a flashlight, have a radio, have a plan, dun, 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 dun. Somebody wrote me, I think they were a Mormon, and they said, hey, it's not an official part of the LDS church. Yeah, but the LDS church allows them to continue to operate, because if the LDS church didn't want them to say, we are the LDS, a voice of warning, they would say, hey, cease and desist. And they would. So it is official. The Chinese official newspaper came out and said a couple days ago, because, Trump's like, I'm going to call Xi and we're going to work this out. They said, if North Korea commits aggression against the U.S., we should remain neutral. China. Let them sort it out. If the U.S. commits aggression against North Korea, we should get involved. That is the Chinese government saying that. Now, I don't think that means, don't get all worried, that China is going to lob nukes at us when we fly B-1s over North Korea. I think China is going to invade North Korea. When we go north or go across and bomb, I think they're going to go south because they don't want us on their border. Did I not wait for somebody? Oh, that's Stella, right? Marcos. But isn't it interesting? China is massing troops on the border with North Korea. They say that's to keep out refugees. You don't need that many troops to keep out a bunch of scared, hungry, starving people. They're putting a lot of people there. The Russians just put 100,000 people on their border with North Korea, and they just have a little border with North Korea. There's a potential there for kingdom against kingdom to happen. And I just think, I brought up last week, if these aren't signs, then what would be a sign? If these things that we're getting ready to have this big eclipse, which has always been looked at as something, we're getting ready to have this sign in the sky on the 23rd of September. If those aren't signs as spoken of in the Word, what would we look for a sign? Let's read some Torah. It's going to look like we're shifting gears, but we're not. Go to Genesis chapter 41. So Joseph was sold into slavery, basically, sort of, by his brothers. He ends up in Egypt. He's in a dungeon in Egypt. And if you remember, I think it's in chapter 40, he interprets a dream where he says, you know, you're going to be dead in 3 days and you're going to be elevated. And he goes, I'll remember you for that. And then he doesn't. He leaves him in jail. So Joseph is still rotting away in the dungeon, Pharaohs Dungeon. And that's where we pick it up in 41. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed. And behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored, says kine. I think that's deer. Does anybody else have another word? Cow, deer, hoofed critter that chews cud. And fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and they stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and the lean-fleshed, that means they were starving and their ribs are showing, right? Did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh woke up. And he slept, and he dreamed the second time, and behold, 7 ears of corn came up upon one stalk, rank and good. I think rank is supposed to be a good word. What is it? Does anybody else have something different? Plump. Plump and good. So nice ears of corn. And behold, 7 thin ears, and actually this isn't corn like corn on the cob. It's grain, right? You have wheat in yours. It's grain. They didn't have corn in that part of the world at this time. 7 ears of grain came up upon one stalk, plump and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank, and the full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled. Y'all ever had a dream where you wake up and the dream itself wasn't that weird, but you're like, man, that dream meant something? Anybody? Because I have. I still haven't figured out what some of those dreams meant, because I didn't have a Joseph. All right, so the Pharaoh, he's troubled, and he calls his magicians, his wise men, his little magic dudes, and he goes, hey, what's my dream mean? And they don't know. Verse 9, so then they spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, hey, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and he put me in jail with the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker, and we dreamed a dream one night, and Joseph interpreted it. So then the Pharaoh says, all right, bring Joseph up here. If this guy can interpret dreams, let's see what he has to say for himself. And Joseph, verse 16, answers Pharaoh, saying, it is not of me, but Elohim shall give Pharaoh an answer that you like of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, in my dream I beheld, and I stood upon the bank of the river. And then he tells what he saw. The good fat cows and the skinny cows eating them all up. And so I awoke. And then he talks about the ears of corn. And in verse 25, Joseph says to Pharaoh, the dream is one. God has showed you what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kind that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears that are blasted with the east wind are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he shows unto Pharaoh. Behold, there comes 7 years of great plenty throughout the land of Egypt, and then shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt. Okay, so he gives this dream to Pharaoh. Pharaoh's impressed. Pharaoh makes him in charge of logistics of Egypt. And what does Joseph do?
Stores up grain.
For the 7 fat years, he stores up grain in Egypt. And then when the famine comes, Egypt's doing okay. Not only is Egypt doing okay, they end up making a bunch of money because they're selling grain to other people. And some people, they give up all their land, all their cattle, and then they sell themselves into indentured servitude, slavery, just so they can eat. And they happen to have the wheat because Joseph convinced Pharaoh, hey, we need to store up wheat in times of plenty because famine is coming. We read in Mark 13, in Matthew 24, famine is coming. We read in Revelation, famine is coming. Pestilence is coming. Now, you either believe that or you don't. You could believe that, but it's like, no man knows the day or the hour except God. That's true. But what did Yeshua say that we would know? The season. The season. I think we're approaching that season quickly. It used to be a thing for people who wanted to move on to Shofar Mountain that you had to have a year supply of food for your family. Just to move on. That was one of the things you had to have. I think most of us have that. If you have a chunk of food for you and your family, that's great. What happens when some other saints show up during stressful times? What are you going to feed them? That's what Abby just did. Got nothing for you. I know you were shaking your head at your daughter, but it was precious. Kate and I were firefighters. I was a firefighter for 10 years. I think you were a firefighter for about 5 years. Volunteer firefighters. And they teach you a lot of different things. But one of the things they teach you is you can't help anybody else if you get yourself in a predicament, if you get yourself hurt. So don't get in a wreck going to the incident. Don't cause a second incident on your way to the, wherever you have to go fight a fire or deal with a car wreck or something. You have to take care of yourself. Who has heard the phrase, God helps those who help themselves? Come on, everybody's heard that. Who knows where that is in the Bible? It's not in the Bible. It's not a phrase in the Bible, God helps those who help themselves, but check it. It is a concept. It is a concept. Run the race. Proverbs 6. I'll go there. I haven't read that for a while. Proverbs 6:6. God helps those who help themselves. I know the first part. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise. Which, having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provides her food in the summer and gathers her food in the harvest. Why does the ant, in this case, gather her food in the summer?
She's getting ready for winter.
Not only is she getting ready for winter, that's when the food is. To use the same analogy with Joseph and the Pharaoh, that's the fat time. The summertime's the fat time. I was just talking to somebody, it may have been Sam, Brother Sam, Doesn't matter. We have a garden. It's a pretty big garden. But I think at least half of our veggies that we eat, we buy at the store. My wife's shaking her head, no.
Not in the summer. I'd say maybe
But
a quarter.
if that was our lifeblood, if that is where we were getting our vegetables in the wintertime, we would work on it harder during the summertime. I mean, we would be out there every single day, lovingly, tenderly, and then we'd be like, hey, we have 3 feet of unused garden here. Let's plant something in here. Let's do that. It would all start looking like that garden right there. Let's just fill it with food, right? Because that's the fat time. Because what's the starving times? Anybody know? The Indians had a thing they called the starving times. You know when that was?
Early spring.
Early spring. When the grass is starting to grow and things are starting to bud and the birds are starting to chirp, they called that the starving time because everything you'd stored for winter is basically gone and nothing's growing yet. Nothing that you can eat yet. And so we would be working on it hard. Like the ant in the summer. Verse 9, how long will you sleep, O sluggard? When will you arise out of your sleep? Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep. So shall thy poverty come as one that travels, and thy want as an armed man. Now, there's a lot of different aspects of this proverb right here. But the one aspect about working in the summer to save your food, to store up food so that you have it to eat, that's a true thing. If you do that, you will have food to eat. Yah will provide. Jehovah Jireh is what I used to say. Now I guess it's Yahweh Yireh, right? Because we don't pronounce the J. Yeah, but we have work to do. Matthew 25. Yah helps those who help themselves. It's not in the Bible, but it's a concept. Yeshua is speaking, and he says, then shall the kingdom of heaven be likened unto 10 virgins, which took their lamps, and they went forth to meet the bridegroom. Boy, I was reading a commentary on this. Does anybody have a different word than virgins?
Maiden.
Maiden, that means virgin. Anybody have a different word? I was reading a commentary where it said bridesmaids. And the guy said, now we don't exactly know how weddings went in these days and who these bridesmaids were, but and he's talking about them like they're bridesmaids in a wedding like we do these days for the most part, you know, where here's the bride, here's the husband, and here's a line of her best friends, and then here's a line of his best friends back and forth. All 10 of these women are waiting on the bridegroom because they're all going to marry him when he shows up. Who's the bride of Christ? We are. There's not just one of us. There's a bunch of us. So these 10 virgins which took their lamps and they went forth to meet the bridegroom. And 5 of them were wise and 5 were foolish. And they that were foolish took their lamps, but they took no oil with them. So they got lamps, but they got no extra oil. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. So they carry like a bottle of oil with their lamp. So not only do they have their lamp, their little torch, they have an extra bottle of oil with it. And while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. See, this is a deeper parable. This is one of those things that's on different levels. Has our bridegroom come yet?
No.
No. So we could say he is tarrying, right? He is waiting. He's doing something else. His duties require him elsewhere. Are we slumbering and sleeping? Man, I think in a lot of ways we're slumbering and sleeping. I think in a lot of ways we don't treat this seriously. I think in a lot of ways we think, that ain't going to happen to me. I'm going to live to be 80. I'm going to die a nice, simple death in my sleep, and life's going to go on, and I'm going to heaven to be with Jesus. I think that's what we think because it's psychologically comforting to us. I think we're sleeping. And at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom comes. Go ye out to meet him. So all the virgins arose, and they trimmed their lamps. They lit their lamps. And the foolish said unto the wise, give us of your oil, for our lamps are gone out. And this is where I always say what?
They did the Christian thing.
They did the good Christian thing. And they said, okay, you can have half of my oil. That's what it says here, not. The wise answer saying, lest there not be enough for us and you. But instead, go ye rather to them that sell and buy for yourselves. And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came. And they that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. And afterwards came the other virgins, saying, Lord, Lord, open up to us. But he answered and said, Verily I say unto you, I know you not. Where else have we heard Yeshua say that? I don't know you. What?
The sheep and the goats.
The sheep and the goats. What about where they say, Lord, Lord,
I healed in your name.
I healed in your name. We've done all these things. We're so glad you're back. And he says, get away from me. I never knew you, you workers of iniquity, you workers of lawlessness. But he says, get away. Yeah, go, go. The bridegroom, Yeshua, is coming back during the time of tribulation, right? There's like, we all agree on that because I can show you that if we have to. During that time, if one wants to buy or sell, what must one have? The mark. And so these virgins, these bridesmaids who need to go buy, it says they go out to buy. There's only one way they can buy. And what does it say about anybody who gets that mark for any reason? You're doomed. Burn up. No good. Doesn't matter why you do it. Well, I needed to get oil for the bridegroom in it. Sorry, you took the mark. You went to those who buy and sell. You got to be squared away. This also works on a spiritual level. Matter of fact, I'm going to take it to spiritual, but first I want to go 1 Timothy chapter 5. First Timothy chapter 5. This is called cherry picking. I'm going to cherry pick and then I'm going to go back so that we don't cherry pick. Okay? But verse 8 says this. If any provide not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he has denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Is that true? Yes, that's true. Putting this in, that's cherry picking, what I just did. Take that verse out, boop, but it is true. Put in context, this is talking about widows. If there's a widow, what are we to do? The church. Well, you know what? I looked into this at Round Prairie with one of my elders. He said, let's set up a widow and orphans fund. I said, that's funny, because the IRA recruits and solicits money in America in Irish bars for the Widows and Orphans Fund in Northern Ireland. And really, it's to make widows and orphans. I mean, that's where that money goes, right? I said, that's kind of funny. I said, but let's look into that. We'll set up a widow and orphans fund. We'll do our bit in the community, and we'll take care of widows and orphans. It's not the purpose of today's sermon to go through there and look at that. But a widow who is a widow indeed, who deserves our help, has to meet a pretty high standard. There's some pretty significant criteria. The first one being she's got to be at least 60 years old. If she's only 55, Sister Kate, what's she supposed to do?
Get married.
Go get married. So somebody can take care of you and provide for you. If she's got grandchildren and she's a great old lady, but she's 65 and she's done all these great things for the church and she has grandchildren, are we supposed to take care of her?
No.
No, her grandchildren are supposed to take care of her, because anybody who doesn't provide for those of his own house is worse than an infidel, is denied the faith. We're supposed to take care of our parents and our grandparents and those kind of people. We're supposed to do that. I think some people will weasel out of this a little bit and say, well, yeah, that's if they're in the faith. I'm not leaning that way. Honor thy father and mother, if they're Israelites, or if they've remained in the faith, or if they're true to Yah. It doesn't say that part. I think we got to take care of them. Now, taking care of them, as I talked to somebody recently, doesn't mean you've got to do, I talked about this last week. You don't have to do what they want to do. If you're going to take care of me, you've got to take care of my 30 cats too, or I'm not coming. Ma, I'm ready to take you in and feed you and house you and clothe you and provide your medical care, but your cats can't come. Well, then I'm not coming. Okay, that's your choice. I think you're okay there. But it doesn't say if mom doesn't go to church with you, you don't have to take care of her. It doesn't say that. We got to take care of our relatives. We got to take care of our own people. Now, let's look at that verse again. So in context, it's talking about widows, but it doesn't matter because it's a concept of providing for your family. How are you going to provide for your family if you can't provide for yourself? How am I going to take care of my father? My father probably doesn't need any help. Praise the Father. But let's say he did. My mother, when she was alive, definitely needed help. How could I take care of her if times were hard like we read about that are coming if I can't take care of myself? So we got to think about these things because right now you think, I'm picking on you because I'm looking at you and I'm not even sure about this. My parents live in New York and I'm all the way out here in the Ozarks. Man, who knows? They could end up here. They could come here on a visit to see the grandbabies and Russia could nuke America, whatever. So what I'm telling you is, we're not done with the sermon. I'm just closing my Bible right now. You got to take care of yourself. We're in the fat times. The lean times are coming. But you have to think bigger than that, than taking care of yourself. What are we supposed to do with the poor and the orphans and the widows? We're supposed to take care of them. We're supposed to be nice to them. It says in Deuteronomy, don't oppress them, right? Certainly, but the higher level, because Yeshua took everything in Torah and actually made it harder. People think that he did away with Torah. He made it harder. He said, you do well that thou shalt not murder. But if you say racha to your brother, oh, you fool, or whatever, modern day cursing, you murdered him in your heart. That's harder. Same thing, it says don't oppress the poor and the widows, but we're supposed to take care of them. We read that in the teachings. We're supposed to help people. So, I asked you all last week to think about what are your spiritual gifts. I'm not going to ask you right now, don't get nervous. I'm not going to point at you and say what's your spiritual gift. But that time's coming, and so I want you to start thinking about what are your spiritual gifts because we are a body. And we don't all have the same gifts, but we all edify the body, and we all have different aspects of ourselves that makes us stronger. We're an assembly. We're part of the church. What is our fruit as a group of people? Because I know people watch these sermons on YouTube and I get comments and I get people to say, oh, I came to understand things on Torah. And one of my gifts is I'm a teacher. All right, I get that. It's a spiritual gift. And so I can see some of that fruit. What's our fruit as a body? Are we slumbering through and just thinking about, well, I'm church. Are we slumbering through? Are we just easing through life and thinking, I'm good. I'm going to church on Saturday. I read my Bible during the week. I'm good. That's all I need to do. It's all about me. Is it really all about us? Greater love has no man than this, that he lays down his life for his brother. That's not looking inward. That's looking at our brother and our sister. So now I got something else for you to think about on your spiritual gifts, because I think one of these Shabbats, we're just going to not have the camera going. We're going to sit in a circle and we're going to have a discussion as a group of people. What are we doing as Shofar Mountain Assembly? Where's the fruit of this assembly? We feeding poor people? We clothing giving a pair of boots to somebody as a church? Are we helping people out? Are we spreading the word? Are we doing all these things? Or are we just content to sit where we are and think, I'm good. I got this all figured out, man. I moved to the Ozarks. I got my year's supply of food. Come what may, I'm good. because I think we're called to do more. And I'm feeling like it's time for us to up our game. Weird times are coming. And in weird times, strange times, difficult times, people rise to the fore. And other people fall by the wayside. You see that in the military all the time. Somebody's really good in peacetime and he goes to war. It's like, man, that guy's not worth anything. And that little private that we didn't think was anything, he deserves that silver star he got. That guy's a hero. But those things just don't happen overnight. And I think we as a body need to start thinking about what we're doing as a body. I am not into programs. I am not into this, that, and the other thing. I am into real. So start again. You're talking about spiritual gifts with each other. Justin, you're talking to the Father about your spiritual gifts. Start talking about what you can do to show some fruit, because we're all contributing. And then how do we take that? And this is a word that Brother Jason could probably come up with better than me, because it's kind of like a business thing. It's like synergy and all that stuff. How do we take the fruit that Jason can produce and the fruit that you can produce and the fruit that you can produce and make a big watermelon out of it, instead of like a strawberry and a blueberry and whoever else I pointed out a little thing, but get some fruit for the kingdom going. Because I think we can. I think we can have an impact. I just don't know what that is right now. Let's start thinking outside of our own little sphere. Let's start thinking bigger. Let's start thinking for the kingdom. And get ready, because one of these days we're not going to have a camera. We're just going to sit in a circle and have a discussion. But I want you guys to have forewarning. I don't want it to be, I think it's called the Aquarian Technique. Has anybody heard about that? It's like if Brother Fletch and I decide we want everybody here to start wearing yellow shirts all the time to show that we're part of the Shofar mountain tribe. So he and I have this idea. We're like, yeah, that's what we're going to do. So then we're like, okay, so we come up with a strategy, and then we just call a meeting where anybody can talk. And we're like, dun, 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 and we start leading the discussion. And if he starts saying, well, I don't think we need to wear any shirts, we'll just quit calling on him. Okay, hold your hands. We got lots of questions. You'll all be called on. Yes, and we steer it to exactly where we want it. We're all wearing yellow shirts. That's not what I want to do. So I want you to have time to think about spiritual gifts that you have, and then how we can combine those spiritual gifts to do more. And then I want to think about the work and the fruit that we produce as a body, this little body that we are, for the kingdom, for Him, not for us. I mean, I'm just telling you right now, my vote is against wearing a shirt that says, Shofar Mountain Assembly, we're here to serve you food. Here you go. Look at us. Aren't we good? But let's think about that. Let's start living Christ-like lives for real. All right, let's pray.